regular viewers and/or listeners of this program will know that I am a supporter of Medicare for all. Not everyone is, and there are certain ideas coming up, some of which are interesting, some of which would have been a great breakthrough a few years ago in the debate, but times are changing. More and more Americans are embracing Medicare for all, and I wanted to talk about it with my friend and the friend of the program, Michael Lighty. Michael is an expert in this area. He's the Director of Public Policy for National Nurses United, and he is a leader in this fight. You've seen him on the program before. He joins us again now. So first of all, Michael, thank you for coming back on the Zero Hour.
My pleasure, RJ. Thank you. Great to see you again.
Great to see you. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is that, and I suppose it's a sign that we're getting somewhere in the Medicare for All fight, but I feel as if as public support builds for this idea, as more and more political figures sign on to it and endorse it, suddenly people are coming up with quote-unquote progressive alternatives that, as I mentioned earlier, 10 years ago, they would have been seen as game changers, but now they feel a little bit to me, but perhaps I'm being unfair, they feel a little bit to me as if people are building off-ramps to keep us from getting all the way to the destination on that road. And I'm thinking of a number of ideas. We had Andy Slavitt on the program defending his idea of United States of Care, which is kind of bipartisan. But then we have think tanks and other folks coming up with it's like Medicare, but less filling kind of alternatives. What are your thoughts, first of all, on the state of play with the campaign to bring Medicare for all to this country?
I think that these so-called progressive alternatives are just what you say they are. They're distractions that at the same time reflect the prairie fire that the demand for Medicare for all has become. We are in a moment that we have not seen arguably since the late 70s, maybe since even before that, decades before that, maybe the mid 60s, where really the demand for guaranteed healthcare for all is unassailable. And you can't really talk about healthcare unless you come up with a way to say we're going to control costs and we're going to cover everybody. The problem is, of course, you can't really do that unless you go to a Medicare for all type system. And so they want to claim that their latest idea, oh, it's Medicare for all. It's like Medicare for all. But the state of play is profoundly in our favor. 74% of Democrats want it. Majorities of independents and Democrats want it. Strong pluralities of Republicans, depending on how you ask the question, and also demographically, you've got a huge base of support among working class voters who tend to vote Republican. So I think the state of play is in our favor. This movement, you can tell because so much is happening on the ground that's not necessarily centrally controlled. It's literally blossoming everywhere this spring.
One of the things, and I like that image, one of the things that I'm seeing happen is that as we make headway, which you described so well, in the campaign for Medicare for All, which is single payer, paid by the government, covers everyone. I mean, just to go over, briefly list some of the characteristics of it. Government is the payer, all of the above. What I'm seeing now here and there are alternatives being proposed, and they're sort of, well, it's like Medicare for all. It's Medicare-y. It's Medicare-ish. It's Medicare. You won't know it's not Medicare. I can't believe it's not Medicare. I can't believe it's not butter. And but they have some characteristics to them, including a continued role for the private sector insurance industry, for example. Thoughts about that?
Well, that's the fundamental problem, is that Medicare itself needs improvement. It's very privatized. There are private insurance products offered through Part B of Medicare, through Part C, obviously, and Part D, the drug benefit. So the core of Medicare, of course, is publicly financed, and it does a great job of controlling costs, but there are other elements of it that have been privatized. So we always talk about improved and expanded Medicare for all. The problem with these alternative proposals, they're neither really an improvement because they still at their heart are like or more commercial insurance than they are like traditional Medicare. So, for example, you've got the latest idea that Senator Murphy from the insurance capital of the country, Connecticut, puts forward that says, well, sure, anyone who wants Medicare can buy it. Well, the fine print, if you don't spend 9.5% of your income on healthcare, you don't get any subsidies. This is a glorified public option that's supposed to be the gold standard, but really what it does is enrich the private insurers because it takes potentially those sick patients who really are the ones who are going to buy into Medicare because they really have to have it because the commercial products are so bad. Well, that leaves the insurers off the hook. Sure, let's dump the sickest patients, most expensive patients on the public system, and we'll reap the profits. Similarly, those people who do suffer under existing Medicare, because the cost sharing is going up, they estimate that by 2030, 42% of Medicare recipients will spend over 20% of their income on healthcare. Well, that's not how Medicare was designed, but because it's been privatized, it happens. Other proposals say, well, employers, that part of the system works. Well, tell that to a worker who doesn't have $1,000 in the bank, but their deductible is $1,400. The employer-based system isn't working either because all the increases in costs have shifted to the workers, and what's called the CAP proposal, the Center for American Progress, they leave the employer system in place for those employers who like it. Well, it doesn't work for workers, but they're fine with it. Then you look at other alternatives, the notion of buy-in. If you buy into Medicare, just by definition, you're not doing social insurance. You're not spreading the risk to everybody so you can control cost. You're letting people piecemeal into the program. That is going to create adverse selection, so-called, where only the people who need it go into it. So if you look at the fine print, it all looks like a publicly financed grift. If you really get down to it, we're going to call it Medicare for All because it polls well, and that's true for the latest Murphy idea. It polls very well, but when you get underneath it, it simply doesn't work. And so we say, hey, look, we've tried everything else. Let's try building on what's popular and works, and that's Medicare. But let's do it in a way that is consistent with its advantages, which is universality, eliminate premiums, deductibles, and copays, complete provider choice, don't get bogged down in narrow networks, and let doctors and nurses and other clinicians make the clinical judgments that drive the decision making. None of these other proposals have that at their core, but 1804 by Senator Sanders does, HR 676 by now Representative Ellison does. So what we do not need is we do not need liberal pundits and policy thinkers to disrupt the popular demand for actually solving our healthcare crisis. This is not helpful, guys.
Well, and also, we also don't need a sort of, wolf in sheep's clothing or what have you. I think there are so many dimensions to this, including the problems with private insurance, and then the problems when you don't have a single payer. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but just to be clear, the problems with private insurance. I used to work in the private health insurance industry. I know the way, I know the mathematical thinking, I know the actuarial thinking, and it is very simply this, that you don't make money out of delivering medical services to people. You make money by doing your best to make sure people pay you premiums, and then you don't have to pay to give them any medical care. That's the whole I've just revealed on the air the entire secret of the health insurance industry. You take money in, you don't pay it out. That's how you make money. So it's designed, first of all, you mentioned adverse selection. It's designed to pick out the people that are least likely to need medical care and then to get premiums for insuring them. That is the entire system. It will never change. That is the fundamental, that's a fundamental premise. It will never change as long as you use private insurance companies as part of a public, so-called public system. We the people will come out on the losing end of that mathematics. It's just as simple as that. Number two, and I'm ranting a little bit, Michael, but I'm going to want your thoughts again. Number two, as long as it's not a single payer paying all of the medical costs in this country, we will not be able to get at the profit taking and greed all the way down the medical supply chain, for lack of a better term, will not be able to get at those practice management firms that are trying to maximize profits from doctors instead of allowing them to deliver the best care. Will not be able to do the same thing for diagnostic groups, for hospitals, and so on. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree. And the one thing I would add is that it's a failed business model. You're right. It's the only product I can think of where if you don't use it, the maker of that product makes money. It's very unusual in that sense. But also, it's a failed business model because it requires huge tax subsidies. No employer would be able to buy commercial insurance, which costs, it looks like, about almost $30,000 to cover a family of four, if they didn't get $342 billion in tax subsidies from the federal government every year, which goes to employers so they can afford insurance. Individuals also get tax subsidies because our benefits are not subject to any taxation. So this is a profound truth that is lost in this debate. We're subsidizing a business that is the worst example of crony capitalism. And secondly, every proposal that we've talked about, whether it's the CAP proposal, Center for American Progress, Medicare for everyone, whether it's the Murphy proposal for Medicare for anyone, whether it's some other versions of buy-in, none of those eliminate the basic model that you're talking about. There's still denials of care. There are still people who have too high of deductibles, co-pays, and premiums in many cases. And the economic reality for workers in this country is that they've foregone raises, the employers have shifted costs to them, and they're still falling behind on keeping up with healthcare costs. So exactly to your second point, unless you have a single payer, you don't have the leverage to contain prices and therefore costs. You can mandate all payer systems, but then once you have the commercial insurers engaged in an all-payer type system, their incentive is to do exactly what you said. And that is deny care because my rates are capped. The only way I can maintain profits is to provide less care. Therefore, there's an incentive built in to further that model of care denial. So unless you're able to put everyone in one system, able to then leverage that prices because that's the only payer, you can't really contain costs and cover everyone because you're going to leak out and you're going to have continuing inadequate access to care.
And while we're talking, Michael Lighty, can we resolve to take the phrase competition in healthcare, kill it, and drive a stake through its heart?
Yes. Can we please?
There is no I had to have surgery earlier this year, and it was fine, nothing. But competition in healthcare, when I want to buy a TV, I can go online and everybody's telling me why they have the best TV. Nobody, it came time to renew my health insurance last year. Nobody was saying, oh, we're the best for thoracic surgery. Nobody provides you better coverage for thoracic. No, why not? Because they don't want somebody who needs thoracic surgery. Now, by the last set of democratic sort of liberal reforms in healthcare, I'm a success story because I had employers, you mentioned employer-sponsored coverage, because I had employer-sponsored coverage. I had my surgery, you know what I got in the mail 3 weeks later? A bill for $3,600. Now, if I'm a success story, and half of Americans say they don't have $400 for an emergency, how is that working out? So
it's not working.
Right. So then the question is, okay, we have now a proposal from the Center for American Progress. A friend of mine called me and said, hey, this looks pretty good. I'm going down this and this and this and this. I said, well, what about the part where it says you pay 10% of your family income for premiums? How are we supposed to how is a family of four trying to get by in an urban area on $70,000 a year supposed to feel about paying $7,000? In what world is that okay?
Exactly. And also keep in mind, as you know, RJ, that's not 10%. It's 10% of 70,000, but 70,000 is not your take-home pay. So that ends up being more like 15% of take-home pay. And really, I don't think your average American household has 15% of their take-home pay that they can pay to premiums before the deductibles and co-pays. So I don't know what bubble these pundits and policy folks live in, but it's not the working class America where people are suffering and not getting the care they need. And so I do think that accounts for a lot of the support that we see. People want this solved, and this groundswell that we're experiencing derives directly from the economic reality that the think tanks are not aware of. And I don't think really this debate is going to be played out by what, Senator's proposal polls well, or what little policy twist, or what Vox or somebody comes up with. But I'll tell you this, you mentioned Andy Slavitt. Andy Slavitt was a key player in skin in the game. Skin in the game was the mantra of the Obama administration under the Affordable Care Act, where they said the problem is people in America use too much health care. We got to make them pay for it, precisely for the same theory of competition that you were talking about. If we all just had to pay more for our health care, we'd be better shoppers. Well, my God, the thing is, in healthcare, you do not want to shop for care. What you want is a provider who knows your medical history intimately, who knows the specifics of your condition, who knows which specialists are best attuned to that condition and best able to address it. You want expertise, you want clinical judgment, and you want choice of provider in that context. That is not existing in the present system. You might have a choice of insurance plans. You might have a choice of which provider network you can go to, but you don't even know if the doctors you need are in that network. And so I think you're right. We've got to eliminate this notion of competition, replace it with choice of provider based upon clinical expertise and judgment. And a system driven by insurance company imperatives cannot provide it.
You know what my insurance company website suggested that I do? Ask my doctor, is there a lower cost alternative? And now,
yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I will close by saying this. When someone's about to cut you open with a scalpel, that's all the skin in the game I need. Thank you very much. So we're going to have to leave it there, but Michael Lighty, Director of Public Policy for National Nurses United, thank you for the great insights, and as always, great to talk to you.
Thank you, RJ. It was a real pleasure.
Same here.